Welcome. Welcome to the Conscious Leadership in Action podcast. I'm Dr. Paul Ward, your host. I'm a leadership coach. I'm a director at the Global Center for Conscious Leadership, and I'm the author of the book, The Inner Journey to Conscious Leadership. The title of today's podcast is Leadership Breakdown, which is the title of a new book from my guest today, Eric Kaufmann. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you, Paul. I'm delighted to be with you again.
Yeah, great to have you. And this is the image of the book. So, Leadership Breakdown: How to Break the Vicious Cycle, Release the Struggle, and Succeed with Conscious Leadership. And we're going to dive into that during our conversation today. So let me just spend a few minutes introducing Eric. Eric is the CEO of Sagatica, which I always struggle with. Is an executive development firm, and he's been running that since 1999. Eric's also the author of a couple of books already, Four Virtues of a Leader and a Leadership as a Hero's Journey. Eric's also a thought leader at Harvard's Institute of Coaching, a TEDx speaker with the title Courage is Not What You Think. And I love that TEDx talk. It gives some great insights into Eric and how he got to where he is today, at least the early part of that journey. So a great TED talk. I love that one. And Eric's a meditation practitioner since 1986. And some of you know that when I start these podcasts, we have a moment of mindfulness. I'm going to ask Eric to do that in just a moment. But just a reminder that this new book, Leadership Breakdown, is soon to be available early next month. And at the end of the podcast, we'll provide you with a little bit more information on how to learn more and find the website on Leadership Breakdown. So this is a good introduction to Eric, and I'm really delighted to be here. So let's a moment of mindfulness from Eric today.
So the first thing to do is close your eyes. 80% of our neural sensory input is through the visual. So closing your eyes immediately reduces the activity and the distraction. Straighten your spine. That just means sit upright so that your lungs are open and that your organs are aligned. And have your feet, if you can, planted on the floor. And the moment of mindfulness is nothing more than just coming back to here, back to now. We tend to spend a remarkable amount of time ruminating about the past and what didn't work and why it should have worked and how it could have been different. And we fantasize about the future and what it will be and what it might be and what it could be. But reality only exists in this current moment. So mindfulness isn't just about an attitude of mind. It's about engaging wholeheartedly, whole-bodily, and whole-mindedly in this current moment. And from this current moment, you can arise as a conscious being at choice. The choice is the power and the gift of what you have from this present moment. So feel the pressure of your feet against the surface they're pressing on. Feel the support of the furniture or the floor, wherever you are, supporting your buttocks and your lower body. Feel your upper body rising and the slight effort in the back along the spine as you work to keep your spine in a dignified, erect posture. Feel your head at the top of your neck, floating up towards the sky. And feel these two forces working, gravity, the descending force, and the ascending force of your will and intention, upright. There's a relationship that's remarkably important for leadership, for life, for love. The descending force, grounding, and the ascending force, expanding. And I'll just take 2 deep, full breaths, inhaling and exhaling as deeply as you can without discomfort. And in a moment when you open your eyes and regain this engagement with me and Paul in the conversation, you can allow your body to relax, but keep the dignified posture of presence awake and close at hand. And when you're ready, open your eyes.
Yes, thank you, Eric. That's, for me, an important practice, not only at the beginning of our podcast, but in the beginning of a lot of things we do, just to take that moment of mindfulness. So thank you for bringing that to us today.
My pleasure.
Okay, so let's jump in. So the title of your new book is Leadership Breakdown: How to Break the Vicious Cycle, Release the Struggle, and Succeed with Conscious Leadership. So let's start by exploring these leadership breakdowns and why they're so common. Tell us about your observations of these leadership breakdowns.
If it wasn't for leadership breakdown, Paul, you and I wouldn't have much of a job now, would we? And so, and leadership breakdowns isn't a recrimination or an accusation of leaders as doing anything wrong. It's what basically happens when we as human beings and leaders in our role essentially don't do what we just did, which is get centered and grounded and act as conscious beings at choice. And so the breakdowns are more often than not the unconscious, unaware behavior that has consequences that are negative, and that the leaders don't understand how they happened because they're not being conscious beings at choice. And so these breakdowns are anything from arguments to missed deadlines to breakdowns in accountability to faulty outputs of projects or products to ruined relationships. Those are the breakdowns we're talking about, the kind of day-to-day, both small and large events that hold us back as leaders from being able to do what we're set out to do. And what we set out to do is whatever the vision or the mission at hand. But the breakdowns are rampant, constant, predictable, and fortunately not entirely without the ability to stop that, which is why this book exists.
Yeah, good. Yeah, and I like your reminder that sometimes they're big breakdowns. I mean, they can be major, but sometimes they can be relatively small, but still have a big impact.
Yeah, it's not quite frankly, the majority of the breakdowns that the leaders that I've coached over the past 20 years experience tend to be more on the quote unquote smaller category. Mm-hmm. There's few of them that are there's sort of the famous $10 million loss, or the company that went sideways because of poor execution. Those don't happen in a vacuum.
Right.
Those are, the glass of water that you're going to drink is made up of all these drops of water, made up of molecules, made up of atoms. There's a cause and effect chain. And most of the breakdowns that we consider large breakdowns had a series of events that preceded that. Yeah. And if we can intervene in those places, we can prevent not only the small breakdowns, but the large ones.
Good. We'll jump into the sort of content of the book in a moment, and we want to explore, what's in there and what you're sharing. But before we go there, this podcast is always about conscious leadership in action. So, what's your definition of a conscious leader, and also how has that changed for you over the years?
My wife had a medical procedure last Friday. Fortunately, all's well. It was a colonoscopy that, with age, that's one of the dubious pleasures of self-care and medical prevention, right? But you're wondering what the hell this has to do with anything. It has to do with the fact that I drove her to the hospital 7:00 in the morning. She went in, they hooked her up to an IV after they took all her vitals. And in short order, they provided a dose of, I think, Versed and Demerol, right? And knocked her out.
Yep.
My wife was unconscious. At the end of the procedure, which all went well, everything was fine. They rolled her back into the recovery area, recovery room, and she opened her eyes. And she said, hi. And I said, how you feeling? She goes, oh, I don't feel so great. I feel kind of groggy. The fact that she could open her eyes means that she was conscious.
Mm.
Right? So there's an unconscious switched off, there's conscious switched on. But that's not enough for the conversation about conscious leadership, because you wake up in the morning and go to the office doesn't make you a conscious leader. But, at some point, just waking up, right, literally from the sleep of the night, or you're aware, you're conscious. But now that has to grow in dimension and grow in terms of the scope of what it contains. And so to be conscious is not just to be aware that I am, but what else is beyond the I am? What else is beyond the me, the self-awareness? And that's where the conscious leadership begins to take on form. So I'm aware of what? Things. There's a chair, there's a computer, there's my dog. People, there's you, there's me, there's my wife, there's your friends, our coworkers, vendors, and ideas. Capitalism, communism, socialism, whatever, those are ideas. And so to be more conscious means that we add more to the field of what it is we're aware of, and then how it all interconnects. How ideas, peoples, and things interconnect, and how we influence them and they influence us. And a conscious leader is somebody who has this vast awareness of interconnectedness and influence that different aspects have on one another.
Yeah, this whole idea of awareness is important. And often we talk about mindfulness as awareness with intention.
Right.
And often for me, I think more about conscious leadership as, yes, awareness, which is a huge part. You have to start there, then having an intention about how we're going to show up, but then the responsible action, what steps we take, what do we do? And so I like to think about conscious leadership as mindfulness with action.
And I love what you say about the responsible action, because really I talk about a conscious being at choice, right? Conscious being at choice, which I think is much alike what you're saying, this responsible action. And what makes a conscious leader is that not just waking up, opening your eyes and saying, I am, but seeing the interconnectedness of all things and holding all those variables in heart and mind as you make choices. And that means extending beyond my ego sense of separate self and folding into it my coworkers, my vendors, supply chain, my customers, my shareholders, my family, the family of my employees. That's what makes a person a conscious leader, is the ability to expand that sense of self beyond the protection, beyond the greed, beyond the fear, and to really include as much of life as possible while making choices.
Yeah, that's great. So thank you. That's a good explanation of being a conscious leader. Now, you've made it your mission in life to awaken and expand the consciousness of leaders. I love that. Awaken and expand the consciousness of leaders. In fact, you were doing it just then. You were living that mission. But tell us a little bit more about how you arrived at that mission, and how the new book supports the mission that you've got.
Let's see, what contributed to that. One is, as a young manager, I was horrible. I was a really crappy manager. I was one of those managers that people walk around going, God, I learned so much from that guy. I learned everything I don't want to be. And I should say that I was this crappy manager while I was deeply engaged in my own, meditation and spiritual practices. So I didn't really understand in my sort of 20s and early 30s exactly how to connect these principles and practices of being an awakened human being with being a good, let alone engaging, let alone loving leader. And so it was at the point of almost losing my job, which basically went like this. The conversation with my boss was, Eric, there's some complaints on your team that you're being too harsh, I believe she said. And I said, oh, that's ridiculous. They're just being wimps. And so the next conversation was with the head of HR, who said, there's now official complaints about what they call a hostile workplace. And I said, oh, come on, we're getting amazing stuff done. Quit it. And then the next conversation was the general manager. And he said, Eric, do you like your job? And I said, I love my job. He said, do you want to keep it? I said, of course. He said, then get a grip, do something different, get out of here. That was his coaching back in the day. And it was a real revelation for me that I had actually been occupying two unrelated passionate domains. One was that I was a leader in the business, and the other is that I was studying and practicing all these meditation and spiritual practices, and I didn't understand that they connected. And it took almost getting fired for me to realize that there is no boundary between those two. I am that human being.
Yeah.
And that if I can figure this out, and as soon as I realized that I hadn't figured out, I really started seeing how rampant shitty management is around all these companies, and how miserable people are, and how miserable the leaders are because they don't know better. And so in my mid-30s, I realized that rather than sort of pursuing the track of corporate escalation and going higher and higher in sort of a single corporate role, I wanted to spend my life practicing and teaching where these two places come together, how to be an effective, remarkable, successful leader. And I talk about an unrelenting commitment to results. How do you get stuff done? With an unyielding regard for the spirit. How do you actually bring life into your place?
Yeah. Well, thank you for being vulnerable and sharing. I've known you for, well, a few years now, but I didn't know you when you were that leader. So, but I think what's important with that message is that we can make the change. Once we become aware, then we can start to make changes in who we are, how we show up.
That is the underlying premise of not only our profession as coaches and consultants and educators, but it's the underlying premise of the human experience: growth, learning, maturation. That's what we do as beings. I mean, humans thrive on learning. Yeah. We just have to find the right person and the right language to help them do that. And to get leaders to awaken to being a more effective and more connected, more compassionate leader means that we immediately have a better impact on society, because the amount of time that Brian or Susan or Amy spend with their boss compared to the time they spend with their family or their priest or rabbi or imam, their boss is shaping their life.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, good. Oh, well, thanks for sharing that experience and that transition too. So let's look at the book, Leadership Breakdown. And I know it's not published quite yet, but by the time people are listening to this, it will be very close to publication. So tell us a little bit about the book, why we should be thinking about getting a copy, and what will people find there?
Yeah, thank you. I think that there is a real appetite for leaders to be able to combine this kind of results orientation with a deeper sense of both their own meaning and fulfillment, and being that vessel for meaning and fulfillment for the people they work with and the people who work for them. There's a real appetite for that. We have a generation that is coming that is in the workplace, that values, the millennials and the generation after them, they value meaning in a way that prior generations didn't have the luxury. We have now lived through remarkable economic stability, and with that economic stability comes this opportunity to really look at what's more important than just making money. And so whether the leaders want to individually become more fulfilled in their role, or whether they want to be the kind of leaders that attract the kind of talent that is now demanding, let alone expecting, to be grown and to be nurtured as human beings, those requisite forces is what guides me to say, okay, I need to put some material out there that's practical, tactical, useful, as well as philosophical and conceptual, so that leaders will understand the why and the how to grow for themselves and for the people that they're leading.
It's good. I mean, that's good in terms of the background to the book. What's in there? What's in the book?
In the book is a journey through the applications of conscious leadership. So I obviously the book begins with why we need it now, as we talked a little bit about it. There are additional reasons why conscious leadership is so requisite at this moment. Not the least of which is the role that companies and businesses play in society, which is to say they've eclipsed religion and government as the shapers of human society.
Yeah.
Right. So not only is it that the employees want it, that the leaders want it for them personally, but um, it is a mantle of responsibility cast upon leaders that they didn't expect. So there's the why. And then we talk about, so what is conscious leadership? And I deconstruct that into some of its elemental vectors or main parts. And then I go into, the 10 or so chapters of application, right? In succeeding order of how do you apply this, beginning with the discussion of meditation. As we started in the very beginning of this podcast, I don't, after 34 years of meditation practice, I am failing to see how you grow in this capacity of more humanity, more compassion, more presence, more attention to other people without learning how to meditate. And meditation has more than one form, and it doesn't have to be within a Buddhist religion, but a way of harnessing your attention is sort of a foundational piece of meditation.
Yeah.
And then the thread that goes through the book essentially is the primary challenge that you and I and every human being faces with being conscious is that we have this construct of identity, the self, the me. When my wife opened her eyes and I said, "How are you?" "I'm fine. I'm groggy. I'm thirsty." Who is the I? That construct of the ego, the identity that we weave for ourselves, is the real element under discussion in growing as a conscious leader. So the book goes through 8 or so chapters of how do we apply various lessons and insights to soften the ego's grip and be able to be more conscious.
Excellent. Good. Now, you talked about meditation. I know that's been a practice for a long time, and it's becoming more acceptable even in the workplace. It's something that people are devoting more attention to, which I think is great. And it doesn't have to be long. I mean, as we saw at the beginning, it's just a couple of minutes. And, some would say, even if you do 10 seconds, 10 times a day, then that's better than not doing it at all. So meditation is a good practice. But are there any other sort of practices and rituals that really help leaders avoid these breakdowns that we talked about?
Sure. Meditation is to some degree a practice of wisdom, right? It's a practice of harnessing our attention. Mm-hmm. And if we're going to be a conscious being of choice, we have to be able to harness that attention. But then there are practices that have to do with love. And I write about love in the book. I write about love as this capacity to include and connect and honor and enfold in. So what happens is, I love my wife. That means I want to be with her. I want to attend to her. I want good things to happen for her. I want to serve her. I love my children, do the same thing. I love my dog, my puppy. I want to do everything for her. My children now feel that they've been replaced, but nevertheless. And I love my car. But I don't love my car as much as I loved it 3 years ago. It's got a ding, it's got a couple of scratches, and I'm kind of over it. And so I'm not paying as much attention to it. And that's what happens when we love something, we pay attention to it. And the practice of conscious leadership has to do with wisdom, but it also has to do with love. How do I give love to my people? And in particular, how do they feel loved? And the way that we feel loved, how my wife feels loved, my dog feels loved, my kids feel loved, my car, I don't know if my car feels anything. That'd be weird. But, because I give it attention. And from that attention comes energy, and from the energy comes my presence. And so there's one practice that's real easy to do is gratitude.
Yeah.
As a leader, not just gratitude to the universe and gratitude to life and gratitude for the good things in our lives, but how often do the leaders who are listening to this podcast consciously pause, notice that somebody did something worthwhile, and say thank you in a meaningful way? Yeah. When I'm on the receiving end of gratitude as a practice from my leader, that means that I've been seen, heard, appreciated, and cared for. That means that the leader has stepped out of their own ego shell and has noticed me, has expanded themselves. Yeah. So that's a simple, profound, and remarkably underused practice.
Yeah, I agree. Gratitude is really important. And I love that you brought in love into the conversation. because that's a word that in business, well, sometimes we feel a little uncomfortable with, yet I think it's becoming more acceptable. And I think if we come from that place of love, then we show up in a very different way. Yeah, for me, I was very fortunate to spend time in and I won't name the company, but a very small consulting firm. And when I started there, I was surprised by the love in that firm. You know, when people met in the morning, there was not a shake hands, it was a hug, and it was a heartfelt hug. And it just created an environment where people were really caring for each other. And our clients used to say things about, you know, there's something different about this firm. And there really was. So that whole idea of love is very important. And we don't have to say that, but we have to come from that place of love.
Well, and to your point about in the business world, why is there not more love? And love is, and it's not compassion, it's not care, it's love. It's the actual desire to do well for other people. It's a sense of connection. And the reason why leaders and the absence of love is one of the fundamental reasons for breakdowns. And let me be specific about that. What I see in leader after leader after leader, whether they're young, early career, mid-career, and certainly late career, is that they have become hardened because their relationships have become transactional. So if you're the CEO of a business, everybody wants something from you. Yeah. Your vendor, your employees, your board, your investors, everybody wants something from you. And so you basically realize that you have to say no. You have to close your heart and push people away. So the absence of love is because we have prioritized our personal safety and are not willing to navigate this flow of energy between people. But when I am able to, and so that's the ego hardening. That is the hard shell of an ego. And that person will have people showing up around them that are transactional in their nature. When you talked about your firm, you loved one another, you exchanged energy, you connected, I guarantee you helped each other more. I guarantee you watched each other's back. You had no problem stepping in to support one another. And of course the clients felt it. How could they not? And so when we say there's no love in business, what we're really saying is that the collective ego in business has hardened to the point of depersonalizing so that I can have a difficult conversation, of fire when necessary. But I think the conscious leader is not only willing to be a conduit of love and show love, but willing to have the courage to be vulnerable. Yeah. Because that's how you grow past your ego.
Yeah, I like that. Good. So let me just switch it a little bit here. Leadership is, we look around, we find, I would say, leadership in crisis, particularly in our political world, but it's not just there, it's in business. There are a lot of places. You talked about toxic environment. So many of my clients talk about a toxic environment in their workplace. There's a crisis of leadership. There's good things happening in small microcosms and it's starting to emerge, but the domination of what I might call poor leadership, let's just keep it there, really is somewhat disappointing and depressing at times. Where do you think the future of leadership and leadership development is?
I had a conversation today with a client, and he had done something he had never done before. There was some grumbling in the company. He's the president of the company, that they feel that he's distant and unavailable. And so he did a state of the company, or the all hands call, or whatever it is, right, on a Zoom, because they're a distributed company. But this time he set up his computer in his home, and he sat in front of the fireplace with the fire behind him, and he was reading a book, in some philosophy book, and the computer was on, and at some point he was like, "Oh, you guys are here. I'm sorry, I didn't know." He had this whole little sort of shtick. But what he did was he made himself, he gave access. He gave people access into who he is as a human being.
Right.
And I think that what he realized is, through the conversations we've been having, is that, as a leader, you're spending, especially in a senior role, 10-15% of your time you're thinking about or talking about or working on strategy. 10-15% of the time you're thinking about execution and operational excellence. And a good 70% of the time, if not more, is really about people.
Yeah.
The future of leadership is people. artificial intelligence, machine learning, machines, robots, all those things. Those are things that are making the transactional jobs easy. And anything that has to do with leadership, which is people, means that there has to be a willingness to engage. And I think what you're calling poor leadership is exactly why I wrote this book, because I see a rampant case of leaders misunderstanding their fundamental role. And their fundamental role is interpersonal. Leadership is a relational competency. All the other things are the table stakes: strategy, execution, operations, finance. Those are table stakes. That's what gets you to the role. But to excel in the role, it's about relationships. And so if the work that you're doing, the work that I'm doing, the work that our colleagues are doing, helping leaders recognize that rather than fear the connection, they must lean into it. That's where we start making a real change in leadership, and a real change by extension on the social experience of human on the planet.
Yeah, the people element is really important. I was with a CEO here in Florida just a little while ago, and he talked about 80% of his time is spent listening and being with his people. You know, that's a big percentage of time, but he believed that that's an important value to, you know, and his door is open, even when there's a lot of challenges and things have to be done, things have to be executed. But his door is open, and that listening is an important first step, because you talked about noticing. We have to listen to notice what's going on.
And I would add to that, which I love what you just said, that you almost nailed what I see as the fundamental problem, is that the people who are called leaders are so caught up in the future, what we need to do, or the past, what's happened, to the very beginning of our conversation. They are not in reality. Reality is happening here, now, in this moment. When they're not in reality, they're not relating to people. They're not listening. I have a client, Sarah. She was able to cut out, I think it ended up being 4 hours of meetings per week. 4 hours she got back with doing nothing other than actually listening to people in the meetings and discovering that the same conversation doesn't actually have to happen 4 times. And when she stopped, got present, got conscious, stepped out of her own anxiety and fear and turmoil, when she could collect herself and pay attention, connect with another human being, have a meaningful conversation, because the number one hurdle of every leader is lack of ego awareness. The number 2 hurdle is lack of meaningful conversations.
Yeah.
When she had those meaningful conversations, her calendar freed up by 4 hours a week.
Yeah, great.
That's a revolution.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. That's good. Good. Thank you. So I'm really looking forward to reading the book. We coming out soon. So I really appreciate you sharing a little bit of an insight into what to expect, and we'll look to be reading that book. I know there'll be a lot of insights, so looking forward to that. As we come to the end of our conversation today, what would you say to an aspiring conscious leader? What's the number one thing a leader can do to prevent leadership breakdown?
The number one thing a leader can do is get help. Get help. We are deluded into thinking of ourselves as lone rangers and heroes, and that is the beginning of the series of behaviors that lead to breakdown. That notion that I alone, that I on my own, that I by myself, that is the ego speaking loudly. And so to be a conscious leader, get help. Connect with other people who are on the path. Connect with people who are further along the path. Read, study, get coaches and mentors, get help. Don't waste your time figuring this out on your own. It isn't, so enlightenment is a team sport. So get help.
Get help. That's a great message for us to end on today. So again, thank you for being here. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I wish you great success with the new book. So I want to come back to share some of the information. So give me a little moment to bring back the screen. I just want to make sure people know where to find you. Okay, so this is our contact information, both mine and Eric. So Eric, tell us how someone who's interested to learn more about you, your company, your book, how can they find out more?
Leadershipbreakdown.com. The book is, if you go to leadershipbreakdown.com, you can get a free download of the 10 top mistakes that cause leadership breakdown. So there's some immediate, meaty, applicable ideas there about how to avoid the breakdowns. Leadershipbreakdown.com. And then, of course, when the book goes live, that'll be on that website. And if you get the download, you'll be notified. And if you want to connect with me about any of the work that I do with individuals or with teams, then it's sagatica.com. But please go surf over to leadershipbreakdown.com, get your download your 10 mistakes, and stop making those mistakes. You'll already be ahead of the game.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Leadershipbreakdown.com. Good. So for me, conscious leadership is about noticing what's going on. It's about setting intention and acting responsibly, which is what we were referring to just now. And for me, raising levels of consciousness can really increase our confidence as leaders. And that can lead to greater success in both our personal and our professional lives. So I hope you'll be leading and living more consciously as a result of our conversation with Eric today. I wish you the opportunity to aspire to be a more conscious leader. So please be on the lookout for new podcasts with me in conversation with leaders in the field of conscious leadership. Share the link with friends and colleagues, and please write with your questions and comments. You can reach me via email as on the screen. If you're listening to the audio, paulw@drpaulward.com. That's the easiest way to find me. So please reach out. And you can find more about my own book, The Inner Journey to Conscious Leadership, at theconsciousleadershipbook.com. So again, thank you, Eric, for being here. And to everyone, I look forward to hearing from you. And we'll see you next time.
Cheers.